Dennis Vu says, Dr. Hahn, hi from one of your former students.
Hello to Dennis. We text almost every week.
Oh, really? He says, can you comment on what attending the Latin Mass has done for you? I attend daily. How has this changed your prayer life and perspective of the sacred liturgy?
All right. First of all, every valid Mass is heaven on earth. It's inexhaustible. Every valid Mass, Novus Ordo or the traditional Latin Mass. I am more at home in the Novus Ordo because for so many years that's all I knew. That's all my parishes did. But I must admit that going to the traditional Latin Mass at our parish at noon on Sunday has been transformative. And I have a preferential option for that which has been around for more than 1,500 years. We're doing something that is a valid experiment in, concocting Eucharistic prayers in the 60s, canonizing them in the 70s. And, but I can't help but wonder if lex orandi, lex credendi is true. Lex orandi, the law of prayer, the law of worship, is the basis for lex credendi, the law of belief, but also lex vivendi, that is the law of life. If you can just tinker with this and change it, you're going to set in motion expectations that will conclude, well, we can change the doctrine. We can change the morals as well.
That seems to be what's happened.
Yeah, and so I would say we've got to affirm the validity of the Novus Ordo Mass and recognize it is inexhaustible. I think we can also recognize the objective superiority of the Latin Mass without becoming mad trads. That's what most of the rad trads I've known over the years are angry. I describe myself as a glad trad, as a Trentecostal, as a tradismatic. I'm a Catholic, and so
you're going to write a new book with all of these puns.
Well, it's all of the above. We don't have to give into the sectarian impulse to say that this one movement is going to save the church.
Yeah.
No, the Mass will save the church. However, it's celebrated validly in the Orthodox, in the Eastern rites, or in the Dominican rite.
I wanted to ask you, what do you see as positive in this new movement of young people desiring the heritage that was never given them? Right?
Well, I mean,
and then what should we be careful of? And I think you're already alluding to it in becoming angry. But
well, I think they're rightly saying to the older generation, look, you ended up rejecting something, and that is the traditional Latin Mass, and all of that went with it. We don't have the choice. I mean, in a certain sense, you abandoned something that you felt perhaps was inferior or whatever, outmoded. But I think the next generation is coming up and saying, give us a chance, let us be exposed to that. And when they are, I think all of the fads of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, into the 90s. I mean, fad is just an acronym for a day. And, and so I think there have been a lot of liturgical fads. I was hearing about, one priest was describing a marijuana mass in '69 after Woodstock.
No.
Yeah. And we heard about clown masses and other things too. And so I just feel like let the experimentation die out, and let the Novus Ordo continue, and let us prepare for it at our Mass, 10 a.m. at St. Peter's.
It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's ad orientem. We have the Latin.
The altar rails.
Yes, and we receive on our knees at the altar rail as well. And so to me, there really is a glorious convergence that can be done and that should be done. I think it will take the next generation of priests, because I can't speak for my two seminarian sons, but I get a sense that they and their classmates are open, if not eager, to sort of appropriate both streams and make it, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Three Rivers Stadium, the Monongahela, the Allegheny becomes the Ohio River. Now I live alongside of the Ohio River. And I feel as though I live where the confluence of the Novus Ordo and the Latin come together in a beautiful, life-giving way.
Okay.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are like, glad trads, rise. In a sense, there's an awkwardness in reclaiming a tradition that was never yours because you weren't given it. It's almost like going to an antique store and buying something beautiful, but it's not really yours, it's somebody else's. And so I think that awkwardness that we're seeing among younger Catholics, myself included, who are super excited about tradition, is just that.
Right.
It's going to be nice to see when it becomes second nature.
It's a good analogy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because growing up,
glad I thought of it.
I wish I had it. I wish somebody had exposed me to the rosary, to the incense. I wish they didn't try to be. And I know I'm not making a false dichotomy here. I'm not saying you can either have a sloppy Novus Ordo or a beautiful Tridentine Mass. Of course, you can have both of each. But I wish somebody had exposed that to me. Everywhere else I see irreverence. It would be nice to see deep reverence in the liturgy.
Here's a question we can never answer, and that is, what would it have been like if all of these rad trads had grown up only with the Latin and only with the family rosary? I mean, would they have gone through an adolescent phase where they too would have preferred the fads of whatever decade they were raised in, you know? And so I don't think that the blame game is something that either side will win. I just think that what we have to do is say yes and yes. Yes, you know, both and is the Latin, is the Catholic phrase. And
here's another question for you. I think there are a lot of people who, and I was one of these for a while, felt like a bit of a refugee. I lived in Atlanta, and many of the parishes around me, the Holy Mass wasn't celebrated with a great deal of reverence, and so I ended up going to a Byzantine church because it was there that I found reverence. But I think maybe there's a danger there too, and I'm not sure. I wonder if natural piety should lead us to want to be a part of our own heritage and not to quickly set it aside and adopt some sort of Ruthenian traditions or something like that. Do you have any concerns about that, or not really?
Who's the Australian saint again?
That is St. Mary McKillip.
And you were telling me before we started that she was, what was her relationship with the bishop like?
My understanding, I got to look this up to get all the details right, so I apologize if I'm getting it wrong, but I believe St. Mary McKillip was excommunicated by the Bishop of Adelaide, who may himself have been an alcoholic. She never spoke up or criticized him, and eventually she was sort of brought back into the church.
I think there's something profoundly Catholic about that, especially if we want to become saints, where we, it's not like a cover-up a la Watergate, but it is like, you know, Shem and Japheth walking in backwards to cover the nakedness of Noah, as St. Josemaria points out. And I must admit, I mean, Opus Dei has been my tribe in Israel. And so when they do this Novus Ordo, because I've never seen them do the traditional Latin Mass, it is so beautiful. It is so sacred. It is so reverent and transcendent that I wasn't. But on the other hand, I must admit that when I was in Milwaukee becoming a Catholic, you know, you could go and it was ring around the altar. I remember in the chapel of St. Joan of Arc, where we were commanded by the priest to stand around the altar. You know, I quietly slipped out, but I remember just those few awkward moments where let's just kind of wing it. And so I've been in many liturgies in the 80s where all of the experimentation was still going on. And I'm just thinking, you know, if you had to give up your career for this, I don't think you would feel so comfortable just kind of dabbling. I don't want to judge their hearts, but at the same time, the objective reality of the Mass, when it's celebrated according to the rubrics with reverence, you know, it just is so amazing. One last thought, I was just talking to a dear friend, a former student, who's been celebrating the traditional Latin Mass for the last 2 years. And he was describing the first time, and he went back into the sacristy after it was done, sang it for some Carmelites. And the Mother Superior came back and he just said, "This is the single most joyful day of my life, because I have never been at Mass where I disappeared, where I was joined with you, all of the sisters, and I was able to worship our Lord. It wasn't my personality, it wasn't my accent, it wasn't anything that was me. I disappeared, and this is the single most joyful day of my life."
Do you have any advice, though, for a Catholic who might say, I just want to go to a Byzantine Catholic church and maybe kind of abandon the Western heritage, as it were?
Well, I mean, the quick advice was what was given to me when I was thinking about that myself, going Byzantine Catholic. You know, my priest friend said, "Look, you are a Westerner, you know, German and English, and so is Kimberly. It's not fair for you to impose that on her. I mean, it's one thing to change faith. It's another thing to change cultures."
Catholic, that'll do,
But he also pointed out that, you know, to shop around, to do church shopping is such a vestige of your Protestantism. And so to find the most exotic blend of coffee, that's understandable. But to find the most exotic blend of liturgy, you know, that is the subjectivism of your own background, your Protestantism. And so, you know, I just think that, you know, you bloom where you're planted. You are who you are. And so if you're in America, you're part of the West, for better or worse, and the Occidental is not like inferior to the Oriental, you know, no matter what you hear.
Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you liked, and if you loved, subscribe.